Another question is, how do we eliminate bias in the search process? And so, there are opportunities, frankly, for bias every step of the way. And we aim to make sure that we can eliminate that bias in every way that we can. So Kimberly, well, let me start with you.
Yeah, sure. So unconscious bias is a challenging one, right? And I think it's important to remember that when we talk about bias, it's you can't eliminate it, to be quite honest, right? But what we can do is mitigate its impact, right? By putting into place strategies or practices, right, to limit the impact it can have on us, on our clients during a search process, and then specifically in the interview process. And so at Russell Reynolds, we like to do that in a number of different ways. We try to leverage structured interview guides and actually have a series of competency-based interviewing techniques that we share with clients to help them ensure that when it comes to interviewing candidates, they are really adhering as much as possible to a competency model, evaluating candidates, interviewing them based on the responsibilities, the criteria that was important for the role in advance, that we've sort of predefined with them in advance of even going into the market. And the thing that benefit there is that also they can also help compare responses across candidates in a consistent manner. And so really what that does is help us ensure that when it comes to interviewing candidates, we are evaluating them against skills, experiences, and measures, right, that we've predetermined in advance, rather than, who do we feel most comfortable with, right? I think all too often when interviewing candidates, we sometimes hear people say, I didn't feel that they were the right fit for the company. There wasn't a good culture fit. And so when we hear those terms, we often do try to kind of hold ourselves accountable and hold our clients accountable to say, what do you really mean by that, right? Typically, that means just it was someone that you feel comfortable with, someone you maybe like to grab a coffee or lunch with. And, people with all different personalities can be successful and get the job you need done. And another best practice I'd say that we also try to do is really prime any of our hiring managers or our search committee members on their unconscious biases before even starting interviews, by actually taking them through a workshop and educating them on the types of biases that we know through our research and work with companies can seep into that interview process, and share case studies with them. And that's super important to do, really before any key talent decision, because that's when our biases are just most likely to creep in.
Terrific. Shami, what might you add to that process?
Yeah, I think not a huge amount of differences, other than, this starts right from the beginning. So that first conversation that you have about, this goes back to my point around not just being order takers, but actually challenging on any biases that we think they may have and what their perceptions of what a particular candidate pool might look like, and where they might find the right answer. And then I guess there's that element of language again. So how is the job spec written? How is the CV written? How are the candidate reports that us as search professionals send to our clients? How are they written? Are they written in the right way, without any biases on our side? And then to Kimberly's point, this whole sort of assessment piece around capabilities becomes so much more important than just regurgitating what someone's experience has been, right? It's about their capabilities in this field. And so doing all of the different search firms have their own sort of proprietary assessment type tools that can help assess people's capabilities and potential, as opposed to just what have they done in the past. And so that just becomes a really important part of the whole process. And then the point around making sure that you engage with someone on the client side, the organization, who is either their chief diversity officer or their HR professional, who is totally aligned with eliminating bias from their side, because they're all well attuned to it. And so they will know who from that interview panel has got certain biases, maybe more than you do to start with. And so we can really help mitigate some of that, as Kimberly says.
Super. So let's sort of pivot over to sort of guidance for candidates. And one question is, should you identify yourself as a member of an underrepresented group, or someone with intersectionality, or should you self-identify as a candidate? So Raina.
Yeah, that's in the last little while, it's become a controversial, if you will, question. There's lots of feelings behind it, and it is an emotional aspect to identify. Myself personally, coming from an equity deserving group, I was sharing with a couple of colleagues and a few that are here on the panel that when I first thought about self-identifying, my pen was shaking, and I thought, should I do this? Should I not do this? Because there's a lot of learned experience that candidates bring to the table when they are potentially considering what this might feel like. But at the end of the day, I think where we are in society and where we are as professionals, we're all sort of moving along to make this something that individuals should feel comfortable with doing. Again, it is an individual aspect. I don't think we should ever mandate or, again, bring that bias to a potential candidate who did not feel comfortable identifying. But as an individual, if you do feel that you're comfortable with it, I think it's a really important aspect in sort of moving a DEI forward, especially when we think about intersectionality, because for so long we were really focused in on gender, and that's really not the conversation that we should be having. There are so many more aspects to that.
Thank you. And we're going to cover some questions around that area towards the end. Shami, what would you add around that?
Well, if I was being a bit naughty, I'd say you definitely shouldn't identify as a diverse candidate, because
I restated it when I read it out loud. I said,
I know, I'm teasing. I know.
I looked at it and I said, oh, I'm not practicing my own advice. So I caught that, Shami.
But I think, as Raina says, that in this day and age, you should identify however you feel comfortable, and you should be willing to have that conversation at whatever stage you feel comfortable. So whether that's literally talking to whether it's a search professional or coach or mentor, whoever's, your first point of contact to talk about this stuff, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I think I should say. Should I identify or not? Talking to the headhunter, if it's through a search firm, around the organization and is it the right thing to do? And then there are so many, when we think about the different forms of diversity, there are the opportunities around different types of diversity and what that brings to the table, right? Whether that be socioeconomic or whether that be neurodiversity. There are so many different things that I think are potentially, depending on the organization and what the role is that's being looked at, that you absolutely should talk about this stuff, because that hopefully could set you as someone that's absolutely perfect for a role. So there's no harm, but as Raina says, it really is a very personal conversation to be had at the right time with the right person.
Super. I actually think we're running a little bit over when I look at how many questions we have left. So I'm going to skip, Raina, just so you know, I'm skipping the next question and going to the question after that, which is, so how does the candidate evaluate whether a culture is inclusive? So you're an individual and you want to know if this is a place where you're going to fit and whether you're going to have a sense of belonging. One of the terms I know we look at is culture add rather than culture fit. But if you're a candidate, how do you evaluate whether the culture is inclusive and whether you're going to have a sense of belonging? Jennifer, you want to give that one a start?
Sure. And, I think, let's be clear, I think candidates are paying a lot of attention to culture today and whether or not it's inclusive. And, I think I just want to highlight that it's not just, for example, women who are paying attention to that. The research shows that men are also almost equally likely to turn down a position because they don't feel like the culture is inclusive. Same story for, ethnicity, same story for sexual orientation. So I think this is something that we're seeing as kind of a generational effect. So it's something that younger generations are paying a lot of attention to. And I think that's also been exacerbated by the experience in the pandemic, where, let's be honest, it was very difficult to create an inclusive culture and a sense of belonging, I think, in the virtual disrupted experience that we all went through. So I think smart companies today are really paying a lot of attention to culture and making noise about it. And so I think as a candidate, absolutely, it's important to be really getting a clear sense of what the culture is. And I think there's some simple things that you can do. I mean, first of all, take a really hard look at who is the leadership team and how diverse or homogenous it might be, because I think that gives a clear signal of how different perspectives and backgrounds might be valued. Also, the same thing about who's doing the recruiting. Has the company been able to put together a diverse panel of recruiters or interviewers? And then I think it's about asking some really pointed, probing questions about what is the culture like, and how might it be different from other companies. So I think all of that is really fair game and an important part of the due diligence on the candidate side.
Okay, and Kimberly, anything that you would add?
Yeah, I would just add a few, things. I think asking probing questions is really critical. When you're interviewing as a candidate, asking even your interviewers, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? Doing a lot of due diligence as well, right? Checking the company website to see the makeup of the senior leadership team, even checking for DEI reports, right? Do they have a report that has been published and is externally available? That's a huge telltale sign of, how accountable a company might be holding themselves to DEI. Checking for affinity or employee resource groups as well, right? Do they have those in place at the organization you'd be joining? And if so, which ones? These groups really play a key role in creating that sense of belongingness and safety in an organization. And so, I'd say just really doing some good due diligence by asking those targeted questions and also checking the company website and obviously looking at websites like Glassdoor, Indeed, and things of that nature.
Okay, great. So, Shami, how do the search consultants support the candidate in this sort of quest for learning more about the culture?
Yeah. Well, I think it's incumbent on us to absolutely help. I think historically, the search consultants would have hid behind, we don't really know what, when you get into the interview process, you should ask. Right? That would have been our default because we didn't talk about this stuff openly with our clients before. Whereas now it's incumbent on us to have these answers in advance, knowing full well that we should get ahead of the candidate asking us about the culture of the organization and their DE&I agenda. So we should absolutely be checking everything about the client from the public side of things, websites and Glassdoor, absolutely. We should also, when we do our kind of studying about the NOMCO or other former employees, etc., get a sense of, is the public persona of the culture of that organization actually the reality, and having that honest conversation with the candidates. But I absolutely think that this is where we can play a huge role in helping candidates on that candidate journey, and not just once they start, right? It's sorry, not just before they start. It's helping them once they start as well, be successful.
Really good point, and it's also important to understand that we want the candidate to succeed. And so making sure that that those questions are answered and that it is going to be a good organizational fit or add.
That's a really good point, because I think many candidates can sometimes think that our job is to make a great hire for an organization and our job is done. And yes, that's what we're paid to do by our clients, but our job is not simply to fill these roles, it's to make someone successful and have a successful hire. And so the work we do around the culture alignment, the culture ad, that becomes, candidates need to know that we're there to help them be successful.
I'm going to skip a couple of people, so in case I confuse you by skipping things, it's because I'm we're covering so much ground here. So let me move on to the role of Chief Diversity Officer. This is a role that we've seen a fair amount in some parts of the world, but not in all parts of the world. And so I'd like to get, the question is, are you seeing an increase in the role of Chief Diversity Officer? And if not, where is what are you seeing as an alternative? And I'm going to start with those in the UK and Europe, because I think they may see a different perspective. So Shami, let me start with you.
Yeah, so the honest answer is here in the UK is we're not seeing a huge increase in it yet. For lots of the larger organizations, and I'm sure that Rainer and Kimberly will talk about global chief diversity officers that are based in big US-based companies, they have an impact here in the UK, those individuals, but we're not seeing a huge amount of hiring for very senior chief diversity officers here. What we find is that the diversity role, as it were, is either held by the chief people officer, the general counsel sometimes, the chief sustainability officer sometimes. So there are different roles where it falls under, but it's not a C-suite role yet here in the UK.
And Jennifer, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, no, just fully agree with what Shami just said. And I think maybe the consequence of that is that looking at it from a positive side, is that sometimes that can allow the DE&I topic to be more closely integrated into the broader kind of leadership or cultural transformation journey. Though I think probably the best companies are careful and cautious about the topic not being framed just as a HR initiative or an HR topic if it does sit under the CHRO. And I think, you know, the best companies really are trying to ensure that the ownership and the accountability and the visible leadership really does sit within the business, starting at the top.